Hello, English learners. Welcome back to the Level Up English podcast. How are you doing today? Hope you're all doing good. I am away from home at the moment, so my microphone might sound a little bit different for the intro, but I can promise that once we get into the main part of the episode today, I will have my normal microphone. So if it does sound a little bit bad, audio quality now, that should get better in just a second. But yeah, I've got an exciting episode today. I'm joined by a guest today. I've got Natasha Broodie, and we had a really fun conversation. She's had a lot of experience with English and languages. She teaches business ESL English, and she's got a new book out now as well called Give Me Tea, Please. This is a really fascinating and useful book because it helps learners sound less rude and more indirect when talking English, rather than translating directly from your native language. So it's a really important topic, and we do talk about that a little bit today. We also talk a little bit about Natasha's own language journey and her attempt to learn 4 languages at the same time, so you can hear how that went for her. We learn a little bit, or we talk a little bit about being indirect, avoiding sounding too rude in English, what words you should try to avoid, or maybe what words are quite dangerous in English. We have a really good conversation as well about some of the differences in terms of politeness and culture between the UK and the US. So that was really interesting because Natasha has spent time in both countries, and I point out at one point in the episode that I kind of notice she's got aspects of both accents as well, which I find really fascinating. And of course we end, as we often do, with talking about Natasha's own embarrassing language learning mistakes. So we covered so much in this episode. I know you're going to like it, and yeah, I hope you do. Quick reminder to anyone who wants a little bit of help, I spend a lot of time making the transcripts for these episodes. These are like the subtitles. So if you want some extra help reading along, you can become a member at levelupenglish.school. Over there you can sign up for the transcripts and you can get access to all of these. You can also get access to all the other kind of courses I'm doing over there. We've got IELTS courses, maybe, I don't know if it's ready yet, or maybe it will be ready soon in the future. We've got writing courses, we've got vocabulary courses, lots of stuff to help you improve, and live lessons as well. I do an almost weekly live lesson, which you can be part of too. So if you want to do all of that, transcript, and support me on the podcast, then head over to levelupenglish.school. But okay, for now, let's begin our conversation with Natasha Broodie. Hello everyone, I am delighted to be joined today by Natasha Broodie, so thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks, Michael, for having me. This is really an honor.
Thanks so much, it's nice to have you here. Would you be happy to give a quick introduction as to who you are, perhaps where you're from and what you do, all that kind of good stuff?
Yeah, sure. So, like you said, my name is Natasha. Originally, I'm from the States. I usually do a lot of travel. So before COVID, I was in Paris teaching, and also in Russia before that teaching. And that pretty much brings me to why I had reached out to Michael in regards to my book, because I realized that there were some things that I was learning as a teacher, teaching business English. And I wanted to compile all of that into a pretty handy and accessible guide for my clients and my students, and then present it to anyone else who was trying to fish their way through learning more about business English and how to communicate more effectively in international communities. So that's a really kind of snappy version of who I am and why I'm here.
Perfect. Yeah, that sounds amazing. Why did you get into teaching business English in the first place? I don't know if that's a long story, but
Yeah, it could be. I'll try to make it brief. So from 2012, I've actually started working at the United Nations, first for British government, as I share nationalities with America and the UK. So I started working for British government at the UN, and that led me to do some more work in another department at UNDP, the United Nations Development Program. And around that time, it was probably 2017, I think, I was realizing that if I wanted to progress more in my career as a humanitarian advisor, I needed to work on languages. So my brilliant plan was to learn 4 languages in 3 years. That was the plan. It was going to be Russian, Spanish, French, and German.
Wow.
And I had decided that the best way for me to do it would be to live in the regions of my target language. So that's how I first got out to Russia. Before, even when I was with British government, I had been studying Russian. When I got there, it did not prepare me for speaking in Russian on a day-to-day basis, but I slowly started to improve. And then the same with French. I knew 2 words. I knew how to say oui and s'il vous plaît at the time. I didn't know any other words. And again, it was a slow build up to learning how to just communicate with just very basic sentences. So I figured before I actually got there, the best way for me to ensure that I had a livelihood would be to have a backup plan if I couldn't get a job where I was working in the community on a day-to-day basis. So I figured get my license, get my certification in teaching English as a second language. And I will always have that backup if if I'm not successful. So that's when I really started working one-on-one with my clients, and I could see where the errors were being made and where the misunderstandings and cultural exchanges were being made. And that's how I started forming this book, Give Me Tea, Please.
That's really interesting. I mean, obviously, the bit that stood out to me was it 4 languages in 3 years, right? I
Yeah.
could barely learn one in 3 years. So, like, I'm really curious to how did that go? Like, did you? I know it's maybe
It
a bit
did
hard to
not
say.
go well. It did not go well. I am beyond not fluent. It's sad. There's sometimes where I'll just have this kind of like this pang of missing being in an environment, maybe missing being in Moscow speaking in Russian. But I'm not at all fluent at all. Same with French. The journey to learning French was not a normal one, and it was not a comfortable one. Briefly, I got there in 2019, and then that was right at the end of the French school year. So they said wait till September, which I did. And so I'm doing just self-study alone and meeting friends and doing language exchanges, only to find that when September came around, we were hit with a series of les grèves, the strikes. So strike after strike after strike, we can't get to class. I'm still doing self-study, and then 2020 comes around, and then we have COVID. So there's no class. So it's just like it really is. If you choose to be a language learner, especially if you're an adult, where I think a lot of times you and I will hear I'm too old to learn a language, this kind of theory. If you choose to learn a language, I think one of the things you have to always keep in the back of your mind is repetition is the key. And if you don't practice on a day-to-day basis, you're either going to lose the language or you just won't succeed. So for me, I only targeted 2 of my 4 languages. I had Spanish behind me because I grew up learning Spanish in school. So that wasn't so much of a worry. But in terms of getting any kind of German, anything, no, not there at all. So
Yeah.
it's definitely a game when you choose to go in there like I did. Didn't
It
succeed, but
it would have been an amazing feat if you had. I would have been very impressed. So I don't think anyone blames you for not reaching the goal fully. I'm wondering if, like, thinking of the listeners now, would you have any like lessons from that experience that like you would learn from and maybe do differently in the future? I
In
mean,
terms of learning languages.
yeah, like if you were to do a similar project again, how would you approach it differently in the future?
Yeah, I think if I were to do it again, I think this would be the ideal situation. Really getting a job in the country, not as an English teacher, because that is, for me, my native tongue. So, not in your native tongue, getting a job in the country where you're going to be surrounded by the language 24/7 is key. One thing that I saw in Moscow that I tried to prepare differently in France was I was spending 2/3 of my day, teaching in English. And then I would come back home exhausted and then trying to cram in as much Russian as I could. And it just was not, it just wasn't working. So in France, I really tried to make sure that as a teacher, I would have just the basic minimum so I could eat and live, and yet spend like 2/3 of my day really speaking, practicing reading and writing in French. And that really helped. So my French writing skills exploded. Like they really they improved very fast. But at the same time, because I wasn't in school and I wasn't being trained by native French speakers, my accent is terrible. So if you were to ask me to just start speaking in French, I am 100% certain not a single French soul will understand what I'm saying. But if you were to ask me to write something in French, then we have a different story. So I would really suggest to the person, if you were to try to do something like, okay, I want to learn a language, we've seen, or I've seen so many times online where someone says, I learned a language in 3 months, or it only took me a month. Okay, maybe that's true, fine, that's great for them. I would say, block out a chunk of time in your day, if you're doing it from home or if you're doing it outside of a country that speaks your target language, and really just kind of absorb everything about that culture or about that language as much as possible. But you have to be aware of the ratio between you thinking in your native tongue and you practicing a language in the target language that you want to acquire. That
Mm.
ratio is important. That would be my number one advice first, and then everything else, go for it.
Yeah, I love that. That's really good. I love the distinction between like maybe getting a job or something, because I feel like a lot of people have this maybe misconception that if you just go to another country, that's immersion, you'll improve. But I've done that before and I haven't really spoken to anyone apart from like please and thank you.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, getting a job, you're kind of forcing yourself to use it. Otherwise, you can't perform your job in most cases. So I think something like that is always a good way to go, like some kind of activity or club or anything like that where you have to use the language to get by, right? I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, that was definitely the target for moving abroad and not trying to do it from the United States, because I knew that if I was in a comfortable space, the times when I was feeling maybe insecure or worried or really apprehensive about how I appeared to others would dominate my desire to learn the language as well
Mhm.
as I needed to. So throwing myself into the deep end, there was no excuse. And with the kind of countries that I chose, you're either going to communicate in that language or you're not going to eat. So it was a really good way to make sure that I could break those molds of panic, or break the mold of anxiety, or tear down those insecurity walls of, oh my God, am I not speaking it properly? Or did I say something wrong? Or is there a grammar error? Just kind of throw all of that away and just try. And what I've realized, especially more so in Russia than in France, is the fact that you're trying to speak someone's language and not just relying on English, which we know is the language now for global communication. That effort to just try is really quite humbling. And so most people are more willing to receive you and to help you along, or to kind of carry you through whatever it is you're trying to communicate, because you're making an effort to speak in their tongue.
I think effort goes a long way for sure. Yeah. Right. Well, you mentioned before a little bit about your motivation for writing your book. I guess you could see, you said like you could see the people's mistakes and things like that. You wanted to address that. Maybe before we get into that more, we could explain more like what the book is. So what do you cover in your book?
So Give Me Tea, Please. It's a really methodical book. Essentially, it exists in two parts. The first part is all about theories. How do we use professional communication at the international level? So I break that down into 4 quadrants, really: formal communication, informal communication, direct and indirect language. And in that first part of the book, I break it down as much as possible. How do you recognize formal language using modals? How do you recognize informal language using phrasal verbs? How do you avoid being too direct and coming off direct, especially if you come from a culture where directness is warranted as acceptable? So the first part, it's all theory. The second part becomes practical, where there are different exercises that will pull all of those theoretical elements into very digestible, practical examples about how you can begin to improve your written and spoken communication for professional communication. So that's really how the book is structured, theory and practice. But the entire book is about, the entire book is written in a way so that even if you're an A2, maybe B1 level speaker or reader of English, you'll be able to understand what I've presented, because I've written the book with very basic language, simple sentences, compound sentences, very, very, very few complex sentences where you have different grammatical structures at hand. So I wanted to make sure that I was covering a landscape where I could speak to all of my readers in a fair and more equal way, so they could be able to understand what it was I was communicating, while at the same time trying to address this really massive topic about how do you do professional communication, especially if you're coming from cultures where there might be a cultural clash. How do you translate that? So that's really the target for this book, Give Me Tea, Please.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I imagine it's going to be useful for pretty much all learners. But yeah, as you said, maybe some in particular, because I know, for example, Russia and many Asian languages too are quite direct. As far as I don't know Russian, but as far as I know, they might just say like, yeah, coffee please, or yeah, give me tea. I don't know if they would say please even, but and in English it's a
sure they'll say please. That's actually how this the book came about, because of my experience trying to order tea. So that is the preface of the first few pages in the book, where I'm explaining the story of, you know, going to a coffee shop in Moscow, and it's probably within the first 2 weeks of me living there. And I'm really, really conscious about, you know, making sure that I'm polite. So I'm trying very hard to communicate what I think is the polite version of, can I have tea? And time again, I would get the hostess or the server saying, oh, dайте чай, пожалуйста, which is just give me tea, please. That's it. And there would be no offense, or there wouldn't be any weird eyebrows raised. It would just be, oh, okay, you want tea, that's fine. And so I'm realizing, you know, we can't do this in English. We can't just walk up to our server and say, give me, I don't know, eggs. It doesn't translate well. It's too abrupt. So I began starting to put together these cues where I'm seeing how my Russian students are responding to prompts that I'm issuing in business English tasks, how my French clients are responding to the same task, and then trying to put these together to understand more about how do we eliminate communication breakdown when it's really based on a kind of cultural translation or tone translation more so than an actual word translation.
Yeah, and it's different in each language, which is really fascinating. Yeah, so I guess you have to know, the English way, right? Because it's going to be different. Like you also mentioned, I think in the even in the description maybe that you, what, and want are dangerous, right?
Yeah.
So could you explain a little bit like why are they dangerous? And I don't know if you have an example of those words in a dangerous sense.
Yeah, so I make a claim that the most dangerous words in what I call the encyclopedia of professional communication is you, what, and want. And to really just quickly summate why, because I explain it very thoroughly in my book, when you use the word you, it's immediately accusing someone of doing some action, especially when you have the word you next to a verb. You are accusing. And so the immediate kind of response in English is, what did I do? What did I do? Because you use this word you. When you use the word what, it's quite abrupt. It immediately implies some kind of question, as though there's a misunderstanding because of someone else or something you did. So what is, again, just too abrupt when it's on its own. You, what, and want. When you use this word want, I want, he wants, she wants, it gives off this sign of neediness, which in business environments, it's the worst kind of colleague that you could possibly have, someone who is constantly needing. So I boiled it down to these three words that with the wrong tonation, with just the perfect right slight intonation, it can cause offense that's completely unnecessary. So I began to break down, how do you approach your colleagues when you want to be direct to a particular person without saying you? How do you begin to formulate different kinds of questions about something that you may not understand without just saying, what did you mean? How do you begin to, provide information or to receive information without seeming too needy and without saying, I want this, or I want that? How do you begin to do this? There are other ways that you can do that, which you'll have to find out in my book.
Yeah, we don't have to give away too much today. Yeah, but that's definitely a good preview. Yeah, I'm just thinking. I feel like I don't know. I feel like Japanese. I'm learning Japanese. I feel like that is very indirect. Like it's similar to English in that you should never really say you. Like they basically never say you. They also never say the word no. Like that's just always implied. They never actually say it. So I think that can be maybe more indirect than English. But I don't know many languages that are more indirect. Um, Advice that I tend to give, I don't know what you think of this, is if you want to be polite, it's almost like the longer your sentence, the more polite you are. Obviously, you have to use it in the right way. But would you agree with that?
I think it's my I think it's my I think it's my first chapter where I literally said there, and I did. It was a British woman who made a YouTube video about it. I literally said something like, in English, we have to use like 15 words in a sentence just to say, please, could I have tea? Something like that. Just we have to use these really long sentences in order to convey or to show a form of politeness. So it's funny that you're bringing this up, because so far in my other interviews, this has not popped up, but that was literally the way that I wanted to introduce the entire book, by that one novice point, that you have to, in English, we have to construct these incredibly sometimes useless long sentences just to say a few words, but the act of doing it is the culture behind how we show and display politeness.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. It's so fascinating, and I think this is why it's always it's hard to it's easier said than done, but it's always important not to translate literally from your own language to English, because like you might say like, I was wondering if it would be possible for me to get a glass of water, please, and
Yeah,
it's so long.
exactly.
Obviously in a cafe that might be too much, but yeah, it can go crazy. Um, by the way, would you say your book is intended for, is it more business English, or could it be for suitable for anyone, any English learners?
I did target it for business English learners. The way that it's written, and from the experience that I've had as an English teacher, it can be for anyone. One of the things that I found that was most difficult was finding reading material in English that was suitable for A2 to B1 level adult speakers or non-native English speakers who are learning English. And the game behind that became, okay, do I assign them Harry Potter, or do I assign them some children's book, or where can I get an article that is for adults, like an adult
Mm,
level, but not written with complex English? So that was, like I had said before, that was really important to me when it came to writing this book, to make sure that the language was broken down and structured in such a way where it was still interesting, but it was relying very heavily on simple sentence structures and compound sentence structures, so that anyone who was around A2 to B1 can have reading material in English and not feel like they're, regressing back into their childhood days if they don't want to. So in that regard, yes, it could be read by anyone, but it is very much specifically targeted for those who have to work in an English speaking environment, or who use English for day-to-day business communication.
okay. And like a follow-up question on that.
Mm.
Um, do you think that kind of speaking this kind of more formal language, is this is this suitable for all kind of situations, would you say? Or is it only for like business, like kind of what we're talking about, indirect questions and formal language? What's your take on that, if that makes sense?
Hmm. Well, this book really explores all four of them. It explores formal, informal, direct, and indirect. But I do make a preference when I say how should most business communication be done. I say remain formal and indirect at all times. I
Mhm.
state that many times in the book. And the reason is because since there are now so many different cultures that are using English as their day-to-day communication, the 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 percentage, the possibility of you being misunderstood is greater than were English just spoken between a few cultures. And therefore, if you remain formal, which all business communication is usually done in some kind of formal way, especially if you don't know someone, but also if you remain indirect as much as possible, you lessen the opportunities for coming off in a way that might be offensive or aggressive, or any of those isms that might come out as someone who wants to accuse or point a finger about you being too abrupt, or you being too unkind, or etc. The list goes on. So I do take a stance on being formal and indirect, but the book explores all forms of language and communication, and when some are more appropriate than, or when occasions are more appropriate for one type of language versus another.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I get that question quite a lot. Like, well, I don't work in an English environment, so I don't need formal English. But I feel like, if you're talking to a stranger or a new person, this kind of English is always going to be useful, maybe to
Mhm.
different varying levels. Have you spent any time in the UK, by the way?
Yeah, my family's in the UK. I have
Yeah,
half
you
my
said actually,
family in
yeah.
the UK, so yeah.
Yeah. I did wonder because I feel like your accent, I don't know if you would agree, but I feel like you have some British aspects in there.
I get told that all the time ever
Yeah.
since working with British government. So I get nice comments about it. I get really unkind comments about it.
Really?
I'm just, oh yeah, the comments are from one pendulum to the other side of the pendulum,
Wait,
but I just go
why are
with
people
it.
giving you bad comments? Come on.
I think it's interesting when we talk about accents, especially when we're talking about native accents, there is a cultural pride behind your nationality and
Mhm.
behind your native tongue. And so to protect that and to preserve that as much as possible, it's a way that you show honor back to your country in any
Mm.
way, shape, or form. The more that gets broken down, especially if you're a language learner, especially if you live abroad, if you practice another language in another country, whatever the reasons may be, if you have bilingual or trilingual families, etc., the more that becomes broken down, I think there becomes there's an impression that starts to grow behind the society for the culture that you were raised in, or that your accent should be a part of, or that your language should be a part of. There's a tension that builds up because you want to protect your cultural pride, you want to protect your national pride. So to not protect that and to kind of explore or to lose it, or to I don't know, you can take those words and explore them however you wish. If when you don't protect it as much as possible, I think there is an offense that grows, and I think there's credibility behind it. And then I think there is no credibility behind it as well. It just depends on which side of that pendulum you want to swing. So I get really positive comments, especially as an English teacher. Oh, I can understand what you're saying. You're not speaking quickly, or your accent is really clear, or blah, blah, blah. And then I get really unkind comments that I just will not even express
Yeah.
on video in any way, shape, or form. But it comes with the territory.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I'm always so fascinated by accent, which is why I sometimes take the risk in, offending people and asking like, "Oh, you sound like this." So sorry for taking that risk, but I I just feel
Comes with
like
the territory.
it's like a sign of where you're from and also where you've been. It's almost like
Yeah. It
yeah, I
maps
feel
a
like
story.
exactly that's what yeah, better
Yeah.
than I could say it totally. Um, yeah, so I wanted to know then, maybe you're a good person to ask. Do you think that kind of level of formality and politeness is different between the UK and the US?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, of course.
Okay. In what
Absolutely.
way? I've never been
Um,
to the US.
you've never been to the US?
No,
Oh my
I
God.
want to.
Wow. It's, there's, God, I don't even know how to describe it, because I think I think for me, when I really got a chance to see the stark difference, um, I grew up, so my mom, my family's Caribbean. And for that reason, they are all over, they're across the Atlantic. I have family in the UK, family in the Caribbean, family in the US. And so my mom, she spent, the first maybe part of her life in the Caribbean, and then she spent a large part of her life in Britain, and then she raised us as kids in the US. So we had cultural bits coming from the Caribbean and the UK that it was just part of life. So I didn't really make much of a, it just it was part of life. I didn't see much of a difference. When I started working for British government, it became like a nucleus. I'm at my job from like 6:30, 7 o'clock to 7 o'clock at night, right?
Mm.
You're doing the stuff for the UN. So you're in this little nucleus and you're in this bubble and you're living that 5 days a week. And then when you leave and you go into New York life, you have this very staunch difference about what the culture is. So you have British culture and then you're back into American culture and you keep flip-flopping like that. That was when I really started to see the difference between formalities. So I would say with British culture in general, minus my family, with British culture in general, I would say there is maybe, and I do preface this, that maybe there is a difference between British government culture, which I think there's a
Hmm.
difference between British culture and then the government culture. In British government culture, there's much more of a desire to be as indirect as possible,
Hmm.
very, very indirect. Um, there's almost like a nervousness about stepping on someone's toes accidentally. And then when that action is done, if you do step on someone's toes or if someone has offended in any way, shape, or form, it can become almost explosive but very undertoned. So you see a lot of the rippling effect. You don't necessarily see the pebble drop in the water. You see the rippling effect of it. In American culture, it's quite different. It's quite the opposite. I think there's more of a directness with formality. I think a lot of times you have, I think in a way, American culture, minus all the negative sides, American culture is just very friendly. So when you are dealing with the formality, it's very much in your face. It's, oh hi, how are you, boo? It's very much in your face. It's not so much direct. It's not so much kept back. And so I would see these kind of different push and pulls between the two cultures, walking in and walking out of my office space. But I would say that the place where they kind of come together is whenever there's some type of like empowering or team building or some kind of exercise where you're trying to mobilize a group. That's when you start to see the formality and the kind of informal behaviors kind of meld with each other. And then you won't see much of a difference between, oh, this is American culture and oh, this is British culture. The culture becomes, oh, how do we engage with each other in a positive way? So if that's the goal, especially for when you come, whenever you get a chance to come to the States, if that's the goal to kind of find the moments where, you know, we're coming together and we're empowering each other, from what I've seen, especially as a person who travels a lot, there's not much of a difference, in my opinion, between how Americans come together and how Britons come together when we're trying to do that one positive thing. It's the extreme side. It's when you want to remain as formal as possible for business culture, and when you want to be as indirect as possible. That's when I see a staunch difference. I don't think one is better than the other. I just think it's something to be highly aware of.
Yeah, yeah, it's so fascinating to me. I mean, I've only got what I've heard and what I can see in movies as an example. Really, I'm not the best person to talk about, but I mean, it seems to me like it's. I wonder what you think. It's easier to make friends in America. People are more open and friendly, and maybe this is a common stereotype, right? The people in Britain are more kind of closed, and it takes a long time to get to know them. Is that your experience too?
That's a really good question. I have no idea. I Because America is so big.
Mm.
I think a lot of times, I think non-Americans who have not been in America, what they don't realize is one, Hollywood and Hollywood TV, Hollywood movies and Hollywood TV is a very poor way of understanding what the United States is like. And the more I travel, the more I realize that this is really the window for most non-Americans outside of America, glimpse into what America is like. On top of that, moreover, when you think of a place like the UK and its relationship to Europe, you have all these different countries together that will, we know the UK is no longer part of Europe, but that would be part of this European Union, right? Let's just keep that radius there. All these different countries that make up that union, and the United States is a mirror of that. So it's not a wise thing for someone to say, oh, I've been to, I don't know, Liechtenstein, so I know what Spain is like. These two are completely different places. But when I hear someone say, oh, I've lived in California, so I know what the United States is like. No, you don't. You have no idea if you only lived in California,
Yeah.
most likely in LA. Like it's so different. So when I think of it in terms of how do people make friends, in the States, there seems to be a culture where, you know, the South is very friendly. The South has a lot of historical roots as well, with slavery and with segregation. But in terms of how people are received in general, there's language about how, you know, the South is very friendly. There's language about how in New York, oh, it's rough. But if you're living in New York and you need help, the stranger on the street will help you within 5 seconds. That's not a question. There's all this language about how, you know, the United States is overall a friendly environment, but it has so many different cultural roots that come from, you know, evils and negativities, that there's still this push and play about how friendly is the US, and if I were to move there, would I be able to make friends, etc. I think those are all very valid points. And it comes, for me, I would think it comes down to how willing are you to put yourself out there in order to meet someone who might be very different from you. That is the culture of the US difference. It's literally a land built upon multiple cultures, not one. And when we see this kind of Hollywood stereotype of what America is, it is a tiny, minute aspect of what it's really like in the United States. Multiple countries live in the United States and call it home. So we have this idea about, oh, what is it like meeting a particular culture in the United States? How friendly is that culture? And then we can start breaking down, oh, well, is it easier to make friends in the US or is it easier to make friends abroad? We will always have these conversations. In the UK, I've not lived in the UK. My family lives there. I go and I visit my family, and I've gone and just traveled in the UK. My life in the UK really was down to like British government life, where it felt like I would always say I'm living in Little Britain for the last 5 years kind of thing. So I would say it's, again, it's like any culture. You're going into a new cultural aspect where you have to learn how to live in a sociable environment. Is it different than the United States? 100%. It's completely different. I think what you pointed out is very valid. It's more reserved. It's a more reserved culture than the United States comparatively. So how do you live with a culture that's more reserved? It just means you have to take more time. You have to take more time to get to know people. You have to take more time to express who you are. I've always seen, regardless of whatever country I'm in, whatever culture I'm in this world, the more you are willing to put yourself out there honestly, the more someone is willing to receive you on equal terms.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen that across the world. It doesn't matter if it's British culture, American culture, French culture, Russian culture, Egyptian culture, New Zealand culture. I mean, I've lived all over this world, literally. It doesn't matter. The more I was willing to put myself out there, the more I was able to be received by the community. So in terms of friendliness, you will see a difference in terms of how people are immediately received, but a lot of it comes down to how do you put yourself out there. So best of luck to you.
It is a good point. I used to find it a bit strange because I was like, why are Americans so obsessed with telling people where they're from? They would always say, I'm from California, I'm from Nevada. And like, you know, it's not common in the UK to go, I'm from, you know, can't think of anywhere now. I'm from Devon, I'm from Somerset. Like,
Yeah.
it's not that common. But then I realized like one state is like bigger than the entire of the UK. So that it is like a whole country, isn't it? That makes more sense.
It's 50 countries operating underneath one flag. It's the best kind of analogy that I can give to anyone who is not an American and is either, or who has either not lived in America or who has only just maybe visited for like a year and then went back home. You have to understand that the United States is 50 little countries operating underneath one flag. And when you understand that concept, then you begin to understand more about how the country's social fabric is made up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And I think generalizing any country is going to be difficult, but obviously the bigger the country is, the harder it is to generalize. I think if anyone if anyone's wondering, I would say like in the UK, I've lived here my whole life. I feel like this is kind of true. Like there's the impression that people are cold and unfriendly. I've heard that from some people who have visited. I would say it's like people will seem cold generally. Like on the street, they might look at you with a very angry looking face. But like the moment you ask a question or you say hello or something, then it will like, oh, hi, how are you? And it will like switch. So
Yeah.
in my experience, like people are friendly here for the most part. It's just you have to make the first step and say something. So that's just to kind of dispel any worries that people might have about coming here.
Yeah, it's with, I think it's with the, yeah, I don't want to generalize. I have this belief that most countries, if not all countries in the world, have the same kind of energy, in the sense that if you approach a person as kindly as possible, it's like the kindness rule. If you approach a person as kindly as possible, you may be shunted off. Okay, that's that person's problem. They're probably just having a bad day, who knows? Or you might be received quite well. More often than not, especially if you're a foreigner, especially if you're coming into an environment that is not your homeland, it is very scary. It can be very scary not knowing how you're going to be received. So putting yourself out there, I'll put it this way, I've had much more, God, I don't even know how to make a percentage of it. I've had more positive experiences being a foreigner in a foreign land than I've had negative experience being a foreigner in a foreign land. I think when you were speaking about what the immediate perception is like for people who come to the UK, it reminded me of Moscow. Everyone has a solemn face. It's just the culture. No one smiles. But the moment that you go up to someone and you start speaking to them, especially if you speak to them with an accent like mine that is clearly not Russian, the receptivity is it's high. Most people want to understand why you're there, or get to know who you are, or learn more about you. So a lot of it, unfortunately, a lot of it does come upon the foreigner, which I don't think is always fair or equal in that way. But it does speak volumes about how we start to engage with each other in terms of communication. How do you want to be received as a communicator? Be as open as possible. Doesn't mean you have to spill your life story. I don't need to hear, what happened when you were growing up. But it does mean that the more transparent you are with your personality and your character, the more likely you might be to be received well.
Yeah, I think it can all be summarized by saying wherever you are in the world, we have more similarities than differences. I think that's a nice way to look at it.
Yeah, it's a small world. It is a very small world.
Yeah, totally. In some ways, yeah. This is a question now, a bit of a topic change, but I love this question. I ask most of the guests this question. You've learned some languages, you've dabbled in many, it sounds like. So along that journey,
is a very good word.
I've done a little bit here and there, maybe. Along that journey, have you made any like embarrassing mistakes or anything that
oh my
sticks
God.
out?
Where do I start? The one that just popped to my mind. I had this one client in France when I was living in Paris, and she was having a baby, and so the date of our group lessons was going to be her last lesson. So I bought her some flowers as like a congratulations gift. That experience. I am at La Défense, and my goal is to learn French. So you start speaking it no matter what. So I've been trying and trying and trying, practicing the words to essentially say, I'd like to buy some flowers. And this woman had this really lovely flower shop, really cute, in La Défense. And so I have no idea what I said anymore, because now it's like 2 or 3 years ago. But when I went to her and I walked away, her face, and I started going over what were the words that I said. Obviously, I said something wrong. I think I told her I was in love with her and that I wanted to take her flower shop away from her.
What?
Oh
How did you manage that? Were you trying to say you wanted to take the flowers and that you accidentally said the shop or something by mistake?
Yeah, I think I said I wanted to say j'adore, I don't know, j'adore la viande. I have no idea. I like your shop, and I think I said je t'aime, which is I love you, and so her face just dropped. It's just like, okay, I didn't say that right. So I'm trying to spit out the words better. And then I think I can't even remember how I formed I want to take flowers, because that's what it would have been, something basic. I want flowers, or I want to take these flowers, something very basic. And then I'm going over these words again that I said in my head. I'm like, oh God, I think I might have said tiendre. Like, I think I might have said store. I want to take the store. So
I'm going to buy you a whole store, please.
exactly. There are so many times. Again, in France, it must have been maybe like the third or fourth month of me living there. As I told you, I didn't have French school because I came right at the end of the term. So I'm in this process of just learning how to speak and write French alone. And I wanted to go to La Villette, I think it's called. I'm not even remembering now. To see a museum, to see an exhibition. So I was practicing for like 20 minutes at home. I like a ticket to this museum, something like that. The trip takes an hour and 15 minutes. So I'm practicing more for an hour and 15 minutes. Very basic line of I want tickets to the exhibit, something like that. Then I realized I took the train to the wrong stop. And so I had to walk across this park. So now I have 40 more minutes to practice very basic line of something like I want the tickets. I get there and I'm trying to say it in French. And the guy was like, Madame, stop, you're going to hurt yourself. I speak English.
Oh no.
No, goodness God. Just loads. What I
just
realized
let me say
is
it. Like...
it was so embarrassing and hilarious at the same time. If you are willing to laugh at yourself, it is one of the best helpers to get you through learning a language. Laugh at yourself. So I have definitely learned how to just not take it so seriously, how to try my best and to use those as, building blocks. And they make great stories years later. They do make good stories. I have loads of stories about embarrassing myself while trying to speak in another language.
I love that conclusion. Like, laugh at yourself. It's so important because there's times in the past I've had very similar experiences where you're practicing mentally for the whole day and you go somewhere and they're like, hey, I speak English, just don't bother, you're not doing a good job. And it's like, it's easy to take it personally, but it's important just to laugh, like, oh, okay, like try to see it in a funny way. I think it goes such a long way, doesn't it?
Really does. It kept me learning on that journey instead of saying I'm going back to the States.
yeah it also helps if the other person's laughing too. It sounds like that guy had a bit of a sense of humor too.
yeah he did.
Fantastic. So I guess we can leave it there. I mean, is there anything that you think that I didn't ask you but maybe I should have, or maybe we should have covered?
Oh, that's a question I've not been asked before. I don't know. I thought all your questions were spot on. It was a good interview. I would just say my book is available on Amazon. Maybe I should say that. My book is available on Amazon right now, and by the end of the week, it should be available on all platforms, on Nook or the B&M website, on Kobo, on Google Play. I'm working right now with I think it's called Torlino Media, if anyone speaks German. Working with a German distributor at the moment, so hopefully by the end of the week it should be up there. Essentially, if you found this interview interesting and you want to know more about my book and you cannot find it, please contact me. I will figure out a way to get it to you, or figure out a way to get it to a distributor in your country. My website is lifewiththebige, be like egg.com, life with the big E. Or you can find me on social media under Natasha Broodie. Contact me in any way, shape, or form with questions, and I'll be happy to respond.
Perfect. Yeah. And as always, I'll do my best to link everything you said, all the book links and website, everything. I'll put it in the show notes. So if people, can't write it down right now, maybe they're driving, they can check that out later. And yeah, once again, the book is Give Me Tea, Please, right?
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah. Nice. Well, thank you. It's been so good to chat with you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Michael. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Hope we can do it again sometime.
Indeed.